Paul himself finally addressed the theory in an interview with Life magazine in November of 1969. Now, the cover showed Paul, Linda, and their children smiling for the camera under the headline, "The Case of the Missing Beatle. Paul is still with us." But even in the interview, the way he phrased it felt a little odd. He said, and I quote, "Rumors of my death have been greatly exaggerated. However, if I were dead, I'm sure I'd be the last to know." End quote. Now, that quote, it was meant to dispel the rumor, but doesn't it feel like it leaves the door cracked open? I mean, greatly exaggerated? Either something happened or it didn't. That's not a denial. That's more of a wink. And I'd be the last to know. It's witty, yes, but it's also a little weird. And it's definitely not something that you'd say if you were frustrated or you're trying to shut something down. Even the headline felt strange. Paul is still with us. Now, people usually say that when someone has passed, as if their spirit lingers, not when someone is alive and well. Why not just say Paul is alive? Why lean into something so ambiguous? I don't know. Maybe it was just poetic. Or maybe it kept the door cracked just enough to let the theory breathe. Now, it does make you wonder, were they laughing behind the scenes? Did they enjoy watching the world try to decode their art? No. Because sometimes the stories we tell, they say more about us than the people they are about. Okay, fans didn't want to believe the Beatles were over. They wanted to believe in something bigger, something that's more mysterious, something that would keep the magic alive just a little bit longer. And maybe, just maybe, that's what nostalgia really is. It is a slow conversation with the past, even when it's not talking back. Okay, so let me ask you a question. Why do some stories refuse to die? Even when the truth is right there in front of us. Now, the world knew Paul McCartney was alive, but in the late 60s, a rumor took hold that made fans question everything they thought they knew. So how did we get here? Okay. Now, according to the theory, Paul stormed out of a recording session late one night in 1966, and angry, possibly intoxicated, following an argument with his bandmates. By that point, the Beatles had become a powder keg. Success had brought tension, and drugs, they weren't uncommon. The story goes that Paul lost control of his car in a fit of rage, and he never made it home. It's a single car crash, no witnesses, a tragedy buried in secrecy. But in what followed, a cover-up, or at least that's what some believed. Paul McCartney the bass player, and one of the lead vocalists of the legendary rock band The Beatles, he wasn't just another band member. He was a cornerstone of the group's identity, both musically and publicly. So when these rumors surfaced about his death, it didn't just rattle fans, it shook the foundation of a cultural movement. Okay, so let's rewind. Now, behind the scenes, things were already unraveling. John Lennon had privately quit the band in September of 1969, but the world hadn't already known it yet. The final album, Let It Be, it was still on the way. It wasn't until April of 1970 that Paul McCartney made it public. And that's when the world officially learned the Beatles were over. But the silence before that, it made people restless. And in that quiet, something strange started to take hold. In early 1969, Paul had retreated from the public eye entirely, disappearing to his farm in Scotland with Linda and the kids. There were no appearances, no interviews, just silence. And in a world fueled by Beatlemania, that silence was deafening. And then came September 23rd. There are conflicting stories about where the rumor began, but some say it was a college paper. Others credit a DJ in Detroit. But the truth is, no one really knows who lit the match. We just know the fire spread fast. The Northern Star newspaper at Northern Illinois University published a piece claiming Paul had died years earlier in a car crash, and he had been quietly replaced by a double. Yes, the claim was outrageous, but then something happened. A DJ in Detroit ran with it on air. Of course, phone lines jammed. Listeners debated, analyzed, and they obsessed. Now, people gathered in living rooms and dorms, turning album covers sideways, squinting at liner notes, flipping vinyl backwards just to hear, "Turn me on, dead man." A chilling line that sparked even more questions. If that's truly what the reverse lyrics say, what does it mean? Was it meant to be seductive? A macabre nod to resurrection? Or was it nonsense that only became meaningful once fans gave it weight? The theory spread like wildfire. College students were playing records all night. Beatles fans were dissecting lyrics like sacred texts. Conspiracy theorists were born overnight. But what made this rumor different from any other rumor? Maybe it was timing. Maybe it was heartbreak. I don't know. Maybe it was just grief. Because what do we do when something we love starts slipping away? We cling. We explain. We invent. On the Abbey Road cover, Paul is barefoot and out of step, John in white like a preacher, Ringo in black like an undertaker, George in denim like a grave digger, and behind them, that Volkswagen with the license plate reading 28IF. Paul would have been 28 if he were still alive. This isn't something that I read or I found in a theory. It's something that caught my eye. That Volkswagen in the Abbey Road photo, it looks like it's parked in front of a cemetery. And as it turns out, that's not far off. The area in St. John Woods, northwest London, actually does have a cemetery, St. John's Wood Church grounds. It's a public garden now, but from 1814 to 1855, it was used as a burial ground. Now, the Abbey Road crossing is just near the junction of Abbey Road and Grove End Road, right in that vicinity. So maybe it's nothing, just an old churchyard turned park. But once you know that, the whole scene starts to feel heavier. And that Volkswagen, it wasn't even parked normally. It looks like it's halfway on the curb and halfway in the street, just slightly off. Now, to me, it almost feels symbolic, like something divided, as if some are here and some are not. I don't know. Maybe I'm reaching, but it does linger. Coincidence? Maybe something more. I don't know. On Sgt. Pepper's, Paul wears a patch reading OPD. Now, fans took that to mean officially pronounced dead. And in Strawberry Fields Forever, it sounds like John mutters, "I buried Paul." Ugh. Some swear they heard it. Others claim he said cranberry sauce. And then the ears. Photos from before and after 1966. His ears, his eyebrows, his voice, his energy. Had it all changed? The theory goes that Paul died in a crash and was replaced by a lookalike named William Campbell. He won a Paul McCartney lookalike contest, or so they say. Some believed doubles were used in the photo shoots, that the real Paul had vanished and the man standing in his place was carefully constructed. But here's the part that baffles me. If you were hiding something that massive, why leave clues? Unless the clues were the confession. Unless the fans weren't imagining it, but they were meant to find it. Was it an elaborate joke? Or was it a cry for help? Or was it a clever marketing move to spike record sales during the band's silent spiral? The lines started to blur between mystery and meaning, because when a band defines a generation, can it ever just quietly end? In The Beatles, Off the Record by Keith Batman, Paul said, and I quote, "My first reaction was just to think, great. Really? Just like James Dean? I was just pleased, because I knew I wasn't dead. So I just watched the play happen." End quote. Now, eventually, Life magazine stepped in with the November 7th, 1969 cover story, "The Case of the Missing Beatle, Paul is Still With Us." Paul clarified, "It is all bloody stupid. I was wearing a black flower because they ran out of red ones. But doesn't that sound strange? They were the Beatles, one of the biggest bands in the world. Would they really have run out of red flowers? Or was the black one intentional?" It is John, not me, dressed in black on the cover and inside of Magical Mystery Tour. On Abbey Road, we were wearing our ordinary clothes. I was walking barefoot because it was hot. It was a hot day. But that raises more questions. If it was really a hot day, wouldn't the pavement be scorching? Going barefoot wouldn't be casual, it'd be painful. So why skip the shoes? Wouldn't you be more likely to wear shoes in the heat? And then there's that Volkswagen. Just one more odd detail in a photo full of them. Paul said the Volkswagen just happened to be parked there, but even that sounded dismissive. Like everything else in that image, it felt too perfectly strange to be unintentional. To the Detroit Free Press, he added, "Do I look dead? I am fit as a fiddle. People are foolish who believe these things. Tell them how you found me. Very much alive." John Lennon, on the other hand, was less patient. In Rolling Stone in 1970, he said, "No, that was BS. The whole thing was made up." Now, years later, Paul would poke fun at the entire thing with a live album titled Paul is Live. The album cover mimicked Abbey Road again, but the new license plate read 51IS. Now, eventually, the Northern Star issued an apology, and yet the myth still lives on. But why? Because the end of something legendary, it rarely feels real. It doesn't show up with the grand finale. It slips away quietly. And in that quiet, stories grow. I don't know, maybe this theory wasn't about Paul at all. Maybe it was about us. About how we process loss. How we cling to magic. How we stretch the truth just far enough to keep a piece of something we loved. This is where nostalgia lives, in cracked headlines and backwards lyrics and blurry photos and quiet doubts. In that space between fact and feeling. Music, memories, and the stories we keep telling ourselves just to feel something again. Y'all take it easy. Peace. Peace.